Jean-Pierre Méan. I'm not French, although it sounds French, but I'm Swiss, French-speaking period in Switzerland as well. We are going to talk about auditing anti-bribery. My qualifications to speak about this theme is that I've been during 10 years the head lawyer of SGS. SGS is the number one certification company in the world. And in the past 10 years, after leaving SGS, I've been involved in a number of audits of anti-bribery management systems. They were not audits under 37001, they were audits under other standards, but very similar. It's important to understand when we speak now of anti-bribery management system, the focus is on ISO 37001, which is the latest standard. It has been published in October 2016. I've been part of the elaboration of the standard, and I'm still now heading a group which is looking at post-publication issues, as we say, and preparing a handbook also on the standard. But it's important to understand that the standard has not been created out of the blue. I mean, the concern, as soon as you're familiar with the OECD Convention, you are familiar with the corporate liability of organizations. As soon as the corporate liability of organizations has been introduced for bribery, as soon as the legal or the corporate liability of corporation has been introduced, there has been, of course, interest on how to address this liability by taking measures to prevent corruption in the organization. So the first, I think, well, the very first was the International Chamber of Commerce in the 70s. That was, at the time, there was less legislation on the subject. Then in 2003, I think, Transparency International issued business principles for countering bribery. I was also involved in that exercise at the time. Later, the International Chamber of Commerce updated its rule against combating corruption. And in 2011, there was the last edition of these rules, and I headed the group which did that as well. Then the OECD issued guidance, the Department of Justice updated its guidance. So ISO 37001 has built on all these efforts. There was also BS 10500, which was issued in the UK a few years before 37001. But now we have a global standard, because the other rules, the other documents, instruments there were not very detailed, and they were more looking at one country, like BS 10500, or to a certain sector, like the TI business principles for the civil society sector. So with ISO, but first, who is ISO? ISO is the International Organization for Standardization. So why is it ISO and not iOS? Because ISO is not an abbreviation for the name of the organization. So there is a legend saying that it was called ISO because ISO means equal in Greek. But the people who are involved in creating ISO have been asked whether they had this idea, and they said we never talked about that. So I think nobody knows. Maybe somebody wanted to call it the international standardization organization in any way. It's ISO. It's a private association under Swiss law. Now, under Swiss law, it's very easy to form an association. You have to write articles of association, and you have to get 3 people to sign them. And when 3 people have signed article of association, your association exists. Like FIFA, for example. FIFA is not an international organization, it's a Swiss association, no? Just as a village shooting club or whatever. No? ISO was created just after the Second World War, but it was not registered. There is no registration requirement for organization unless you get a certain level, turnover, and employees. Now, it's only in 2002 that ISO registered itself in the trade registry with the Register of Companies in Geneva. Before that, it was just based on these 3 people who signed, maybe there were more than 3 for ISO, who signed Article of Association. But it has built itself as the organization for standardization. It has 161 members called national standardization bodies. In ISO, they are not companies, but they are bodies. And this is the world of ISO. So you have 119 full members in blue. I draw your attention to the fact that North Korea is a member of ISO. Then there are 40 correspondent members. They are in brown. And there are 4 subscriber members. The subscriber members are in dark brown. You don't see very much, but there is one here. This, I think, is Vietnam. So that's 169 altogether. So the member bodies, they are also called bodies, member bodies, are full members with voting rights. The correspondent members do not have voting rights, and the subscriber members just get informed. And it's a stage, of course, which is supposed to go into full membership. There are over 20,000 standards. Over 20,000 standards. Most standards, you probably don't know that they are ISO standards. Currency standards. USD for the US dollar, CHF for the Swiss franc, EUR for the euro. This is an ISO standard. Country standard, also the country abbreviation, also ISO standard. Of course, the most popular standard, the most well-known is 9001, quality systems. Then there is a system 19600 on compliance, which is evolving now into a certifiable standard. 26,000 social responsibility, 31,000 risk management, a useful standard, and 37001 Anti-Bribery Management System. Now, the management system standards, the management system is defined as the way in which an organization manages the interrelated parts of its business in order to achieve its objectives. These objectives can relate to a number of different topics, including product or service quality, operational efficiency, environmental performance, health and safety in the workplace, and many more. So the management system standards specify repeatable steps that organizations can implement to achieve their goals and objectives and to create an organizational culture. Now, the ISO management system standards have a common structure. That means common list of terms that are defined. This is called the high-level structure, and this means that it's easy to go from one management system standard to another. So, for example, the anti-bribery management system of ISO 37001 can be integrated into a quality management system 9001 easily. And also, it will also be possible to integrate it into 19600 compliance. Now, some standards are guidance standards, so they are standards which you look at to see how to do certain things, while requirements standards give requirements. In guidance systems, the verb used is should. An organization should do this, should do that. Nobody is going to come and check. In a requirements standard, the word is shall. You have a number of requirements, and if organizations want to conform to the standard, they have to implement these requirements. And that can be then certified by a certification body. Only requirement standards can be certified, in the ISO framework. So what I'm saying here applies to the ISO framework. Since we are dealing with a private organization, it is not law, and it is quite possible. I could write, or we could together write the standard today and say that we're going to certify it. But the certification under the standard would just be as good as our reputation and competence. I hope I am on the right page. Yeah. So the various kind of audits, this is also important to understand, because you hear all the time talking about first-party audit, second-party audit, and third-party audit. So a first-party audit is an audit by the organization itself. So when I speak of organizations, that's ISO speak. You have bodies that are the certification companies, and you have organizations which are the companies or other organization using a standard. Now, in the first-party audit, it's a self-assessment. You take the standard and you self-assess yourself against the standard. That can be a preparation for a certification audit. The second-party audits are audits that are imposed on, for example, by an association and its members. There is an association of certification companies, IFSA, and as a condition to become a member of that association, you have to provide every year a statement by your auditors that you conform to the rules, to the code of conduct of the association. Well, that's the second-party audit. So the second-party audit, it's for a specific purpose between two parties. It could be a professional association. It could be a company requiring its auditors to provide evidence that they implement a standard. And third-party audits are conducted by accredited certification bodies. Only third-party or independent certification bodies. Only these third-party audits can be qualified as a certification certification under a certain standard. So ISO itself does not conduct certification, but because it has issued standards that it knows that some standards get certified, it has issued a whole framework for certification. So there are first 1911 guidelines for the auditing management systems that apply to all management systems. There are requirements for accreditation bodies. It's not anybody that can accredit certification companies. There are requirements for audit and certification of management systems. This is a standard in itself. And there are also, when we elaborated the standard, we thought, well, auditing anti-bribery is not quite the same as auditing quality. I mean, it takes certain specific knowledge, qualifications to audit anti-bribery. So we created this requirement for auditing and certification of anti-bribery management system. It's the technical specification 17021-9. The 9 means that there is the number 1 is the general requirements, and then there are 8 standards for which there are special auditing requirements. So that's why it's called 17021-9. So just a word more on accreditation. Accreditation bodies are the organization that accredit certification bodies. So they are grouped in the International Accreditation Forum, IAF. You have COFRAC in France. You have DAX in Germany, Deutsche Akkreditierungsstelle. I functioned as an expert for DAX in the accreditation audits. UCAS, United Kingdom Accreditation Services, Accreditation in Italy. Then in the US you have a few. You have ANAB, you have ANSI. I think PECB is accredited in the United States. IAS, that's also a US accreditation body. In most countries, these accreditation bodies are part of the administration or have a relation to the administration. Like DAX is a body that has been delegated certain function by the administration. So these certification bodies conduct regular assessments of conformity assessment bodies. The goal is that accreditation should ensure a level certification playing field, but not all accreditation bodies accredit for ISO 37001 because it takes some time to be ready for to accredit. DAX or COFRAC, I think, they first had to get themselves ready to get the competence and the people for accreditation. So first, in Switzerland, I can tell you, they said, "Oh, we don't have the competence, we don't have the resources, we don't have the money. In Switzerland, they don't have money. Well, happens. So Swiss companies have to go to Germany to get accredited, but the Germans are very helpful there, and they do that. So it takes some time. It has taken some time for accreditation bodies to be ready to accredit under ISO 3701. Certainly in France, Germany, the UK, they had to take this time. And then they have the time needed for accreditation. And accreditation is not something that you go with your forms all filled out and you apply and then you get accredited. There are accreditation audits. There are at least two kinds of audits: an audit of the organization's how the organization works, and then a surveillance audit, or an audit under the witness audit with the presence of an expert. So that's why, really, at least in Europe, apart from Italy has been more efficient than everybody else with accreditation. They have done accreditation a few months after the standard was published. But in Germany, I can tell you there are 4 applications that are pending for accreditation. In France, there's been 1 company has been accredited. I don't think there has been anybody else. No other application. The company has a Euro compliance. In the UK, there are 3 or 4 as well. So it's now then that accredited companies start will start to be present on the market. So I go through guidelines for auditing management systems. I go through that quickly. So the requirements to audit and certify management system is first that you have to be a legal entity or a governmental body. There is no accreditation of persons. There is no accreditation, for example, of individuals as auditors. The accreditation is given to the certification body, to a legal entity, and that legal entity has to show that they have qualified auditors. They have to train their auditors, and they have to show that they have qualified auditors. When there is a witness, when we do witness audits, we look at the CVs and the competence of the auditors to make sure that they are there. And there are requirements for confidentiality, of course. I mean, the certification bodies must they can look into the body, the inners of an organization, and they have to keep all the information that they receive confidential. Impartiality. So there is one requirement which is important to understand, that a certification body cannot do any consultancy. There is some have the understanding that they can't do consultancy for organization that they will certify. This is not correct. The certification body can certify, cannot do any consultancy in the field of anti-bribery. Not the certification body, not its controlled entities. And it cannot outsource its work to a consultancy organization. So there's a minimum 2-year cooling off period for audits following internal audits. If an internal audit has been conducted by a certification body, it cannot certify that same organization for 2 years. There is also a minimum 2-year cooling off period for consultancy by related entities. So the non-consultancy requirements applies to the organization and controlled entities, but if you go upstream, the organization controlling a certification body, if that organization has done some consultancy, then there is a cooling off period of 2 years before its daughter company is allowed to certify that entity. Also, consultancy by individual auditors. I don't know whether this is clear, but it may be a bit confusing, but that's the way it works. Individual auditors, I am one myself, is allowed to conduct consultancy, but not to be involved, of course, in the certification of organizations that will be certified by the certification body. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask them and to interrupt me while we go on, because maybe by the time I finish we'll have forgotten certain things. Now the specific additional auditors' competencies for anti-bribery. The idea, my personal idea was that, and still is, that people who audit anti-bribery should have been involved in compliance or in running an anti-bribery management system at some level. So have some experience, but in the ISO vocabulary, it's not allowed to talk about experience. We talked about knowledge. Knowledge of bribery concepts, bribery risks, scenarios, indicators, controls, how are bribes paid, the use of business partners, for example. What about facilitation payments? Under the standard, if you look at the standard, you will see that there is nothing about facilitation payments. But if you go in the guidance, there is something about facilitation payments. And some people say, well, it means that the standard is not forbidding facilitation payments. That's not correct. If you prohibit bribery, that means all forms of bribery, including facilitation payments. If you want to permit facilitation payment, you have to make an exception for facilitation payments. So I think if you have a general prohibition of bribery, it includes facilitation payments. Well, that's an aside. So this, the context of the organization, the laws, the regulations applicable to bribery. I mean, the general, the FCPA, the UK Bribery Act, the OECD Convention, of course, there are more to anti-bribery that FCPA and the UK Bribery Act, because all parties that have ratified the OECD Convention have anti-bribery legislations. How to conduct a bribery risk assessment, due diligence, what is the bribery risk, how to identify the bribery risk, what are the anti-bribery controls, and what are anti-bribery management systems. These are actually things that are in the standard. So when you start with the certification, now we are getting into the audit itself. Before starting the audit, there is a number of pre-certification activities. You have to define the scope of certification. The certification can include a whole company. It can include part of that company. It can include a subsidiary, or be limited to a subsidiary. So all this is possible. So you have to define the scope of the certification. You have to define the audit time. The audit time is defined considering the size, location, complexity, and maturity of the system. There is a table. There is not much guidance on the audit time, but there is a table on the audit time for quality management systems. That's been issued by the International Accreditation Forum. So a possibility is to take the number of days for quality management systems, but adapt it to anti-bribery. How do you adapt it? Quality management, if you have a company, let's say, with 200 employees, they are all concerned by quality. But probably in that company, about 20 people are concerned with bribery. So adapting the QMS table is by taking the numbers. The numbers in the QMS table are based on the number of personnel in the company. You take that table, and instead of taking the full number of personnel in that organization, you take the number of personnel exposed to bribery, which makes sense. And in order to take into consideration the rest of the personnel a little bit as well, you add the square root of the other personnel. You see, it becomes very, very complicated, but this gives you some idea of the audit time. You have to take into consideration, you have to adapt this based on the bribery risk in the organization, multi-site, whether it's a single site operation, multiple site operation. So you have to take this into account for the audit time. Then you look at areas for improvement in the organization. You can make a small visit. You cannot, when you start the certification, you cannot give advice to the organization. You cannot tell them what to do. But you can point to them areas for improvement based on a small appreciation, the first look at the system. In the audit, the same thing in the audit. I mean, I've been in witness audits where the auditor was saying, but we are not doing this. Why don't you do that? And this and that. That's not allowed. Auditors are here to listen to what people do, not to tell them what to do. Then you have to select the audit team to determine the dates and the sites to be visited and the persons to be interviewed. And the persons to be interviewed, I can tell them, and this seems simple, but to establish a program, an interview program, is something. It's a headache, because people are not there when you want them, or the other one calls and says that he will not be there when he said he would, etc. That takes quite some time. You have to interview people that are relevant to the requirements of the standard. So if the standard said leadership, that means you have to interview the head of the company, you have to interview the chairman of the board or of the audit committee of the board. You have to interview them to see whether they support the anti-bribery management system. Then you have to interview personnel. You have to interview communication. You have to you interview with the anti-bribery compliance function. I mean, that's another example of ISO speak. The compliance officer. All these people, you have to interview them, and then to establish a program for a large company, when you have 50, 60 interviews maybe. Then the stage 1 of the audit is off-site, partly on-site. So that's a review of the documented information. So the auditee should send you all the policies, procedures, etc. to be reviewed in a desk review. You have to obtain information on the site, the processes, the equipment, the controls, the statutory requirements applicable. You have to allocate resources and to establish whether the organization is ready for stage 2. Now the stage 1 should, in the specification of time, it should be less time than for stage 2. Stage 2 is the on-site part of the certification. So you have an opening meeting. The opening meeting is with management and with the functions and processes to be audited. So this is not the interview of management, mind you. It's just the opening meeting with a certain number of people. I've again been in a witness audit where they didn't have a presence of management in the opening meeting. I'm not sure there was an opening meeting because it was the only person that was present was the compliance officer. So that's it's conducted by the audit team leader. There is an audit team leader, unless there is only one auditor. For very small organizations, that's possible. How the audit will be conducted is to be explained. The participants have to be introduced on both sides, of course. Presentation of the auditee, of the company, of the auditee, and a confirmation of the logistics and of the audit details. For the logistics, I think what has to be arranged is office space and assistance. For the office space and assistance for the audit team. The audit team should be able to have a room to reconvene or to look at documents and to conduct interviews. I think the interviews should be conducted without management presence. They should normally be conducted in the room that has been put at the disposal of the auditors. But if you interview important people, they generally don't want to move. So they will be interviewed in the office. Why not? That's possible. Without management presence, I think the baseline should be that interviews should be conducted only with one person, ideally 2 auditors interviewing one person, sometimes 1 auditor interviewing one person. I don't think that you should have 5 auditors interviewing one person, no? Because that's very intimidating for people who are audited. Without management presence, I think in certain audits, for example, the compliance officer will want to be present to say, well, this should not be the rule, but in certain instances, it does not harm really. I mean, the compliance officer can also learn something in these interviews. But you have to avoid that somebody sitting in the audit who could intimidate the person being audited. If they want to say something bad about their company, that should be kept confidential and their boss should not sit. Notes should be made of the interviews, at least handwritten notes. And copies, in the interviews, if documents are mentioned or activities are mentioned, then the auditor should ask for copies, for screenshots, activities. I'm going back. So the interviews, I mean, as I've said before, with chairman of the board and the audit or ethics committee, that's an interview basically to determine how committed they are. And you feel this pretty well. The chief executive officer as well. I mean, I've been once audited an organization, and when I arrived, they didn't know what I came for. Actually, they had been informed, but they thought it was something else. They thought I was an auditor for something else. I don't remember what. But then the compliance officer said, "Oh yes, I remember this anti-bribery audit. Yes, of course, yes." So they organized something, and then they said, "Well, the CEO, no, he's not available today. No, he's not." And then probably the compliance officer told the CEO, "Look, I mean, he needs to see you." So I was taken to the CEO just before lunch, and he was in his office, and he said, "Good morning, how are you? Thank you very much." And that was all. So I think that's not a demonstration of a very intensive support for an anti-bribery management system if the CEO, all that he can do is to shake a hand with the auditors for anti-bribery management system. The other members of top management, some members of top management, finance, marketing. Of course, marketing, they are quite involved. I mean, that's where, if bribery occurs, that's where it occurs. The functions, HR because they are participating. They should participate in organizing training. There are also some human resource requirements in the standard, like when hiring employees, telling them about the anti-bribery policy, etc. Internal audit, legal, compliance, anti-bribery, public relations, procurement for incoming bribery, and security. And then some selected personnel, maybe because just to say, well, I also want to talk to some people taking at random to see whether they know about the anti-bribery policy and what they think about it. So the documentation is relevant to bribery. They are policies, procedures, contractual documentation. What does the organization say in its contractual documentation with suppliers or with, for example, with subcontractors? Do they say something about that these subcontractors have to comply with or service providers have to comply with the organization's anti-bribery policy? Internal and external communication media. What does the organization communicate on its website, on its intranet, etc.? Minutes of the board and top management meetings. Do they talk about anti-bribery? Does the anti-bribery management function, compliance function, report to the board? Is that minuted? Annual report, corporate responsibility report, internal audit report, and investigation reports. If there are if there is some suspected bribery, what investigations are conducted and what consequences are there to this investigation. On-site processes and activities, the internet and the intranet. The selected due diligence files, it should be files. The due diligence for most industrial and commercial organizations, the sensitive point for bribery is business partners, agents, consultants, intermediaries. That's the most dangerous area. So you have to see how due diligence is conducted on these people, and how these business associates are managed, because it's not sufficient to have due diligence when you hire them. For high-risk business associates, the expression in the stand is business associates that present a more than negligible risk of bribery. That's a bit a convoluted expression. How the risk assessment has been done, training sessions, what records are there from training sessions, what is their content, who has attended, how the reporting system has been managed, the hotline, how the gift and hospitality policy is implemented, and what is done with respect to sponsoring, because sponsoring can be a subterfuge for bribery. Then you have a closing meeting, again with management and the functions and processes to be audited. It's conducted by the audit team leader. At this closing meeting, the non-conformities are presented. There are two kinds of non-conformities. There are minor non-conformities. These minor non-conformities are these minor non-conformities are not an obstacle to certification, but they have to be fixed. And there are major non-conformities. Major non-conformities are an obstacle to certification, and so if there is a major non-conformity, the certification cannot be done, cannot be attributed, and then the organization has 6 months to come and correct the major non-conformity, and then the certification can be done.
Just one point: if you have many minor non-conformities, can be taken as one major non-conformity.
Yeah. So a number of minor non-conformities, quite right, can end up in a major non-conformity. So the agreement on time frame for responding, for correcting the minor non-conformities, and recording diverging opinions, if any. So I've talked about the minor and major non-conformities. That's not preliminary requirement. Then the audit reports will cover the details of the audit, including the identification of the team, the dates and places of activities, the audit findings, of course, evidence and conclusion, unresolved issues, recommendations, and a statement that the system meets the requirements or does not. And the post-audit activities, the submission of a proposal for correction of non-conformities by auditors. The proposal for the corrections does not come from the auditor. It's that there are minor non-conformities. We're getting to the end, don't worry. The proposal to correct non-conformities must come from the auditee. And then the corrections, the effectiveness of this correction has to be reviewed, and the certification decision. So the initial audit, the audit cycle, after 1 year a surveillance audit, after 2 years another surveillance audit, and after 3 years recertification. So thank you very much. I think we were better than by about 2 minutes. So